Good morning and welcome to Paradigm Biopharmaceuticals presentation at the NWR conference. This morning, we've got Paradigm, who's a late-stage drug development company with the mission to develop and commercialise pentosan polysulphate sodium, or PPS, for the treatment of pain associated with musculoskeletal disorders driven by injury, inflammation, ageing, degenerative disease, infection, or genetic predisposition. The key feature of the activity of PPS is its anti-inflammatory and tissue regenerative properties. Today from Paradigm, we have Paul Rennie, the CEO and interim chairman, and he has been involved in drug development and a number of preclinical and clinical trial programs, including as the inaugural COO of Mesoblast, and then as Executive VP, new product development at Mesoblast as well. Paul has an extensive experience in commercialising IP, which is well and truly on show at Paradigm. As usual, in terms of questions, we encourage the more the better, and just do so via the Q&A box down the bottom. But Paul, I'll hand it over to you to get started. Thanks very much for joining.
Yeah, thanks very much, Matt. And also thanks everyone who's joined via video link. This presentation is a corporate update, but I would just like to put in a plug for our AGM meeting, which is also going to be a video or virtual AGM meeting this year on the 19th of November. That will give a lot more detail and granularity around our particular programs as we take shareholders through exactly what's been going on in relation to our submissions with the regulatory authorities. As Matt said, we are a late stage company, so could I just maybe reinforce that point by saying to people, if you don't know about Paradigm, we will provide a bit of an update to the company and what we do. But to put it into perspective, this time next year, so November 2021, Paradigm should be right in the middle of at least 2 phase 3 clinical trials running in North America and also in Europe. So we are well at the towards the end stage of the development of this compound for the indication of osteoarthritis. I would like to leave you with at least 3 take-home messages, and I have 3 slides, and I'll identify those as to key messages for anyone viewing the presentation to take home and hopefully remain with you in terms of what Paradigm is about and what we're doing, and what does it represent for any current investors or future investors. We do have a requirement to put up our disclaimer, as we are on the ASX 300. We are required to identify that there will be some forward-looking statements, and for investors to take note of that. Matt's already mentioned our mission, but essentially it's to develop and commercialise pentosan polysulphate, an outstanding pharmaceutical product for the treatment of joint pain driven by a range of different factors such as injury, inflammation, ageing, degenerative disease, infection, or genetic predisposition. And our lead indication, of course, is osteoarthritis. About Paradigm, we are repurposing an already FDA-approved drug with a 60-year track record of treating inflammation. That's pentosan polysulphate, which we've trademarked and have the registered trademark throughout the world for xylitol. The difference between the FDA-approved product and what Paradigm is doing is the FDA-approved product is an oral version of pentosan polysulphate, and Paradigm is repurposing the injectable version of the drug. There's some technical reasons why the injectable version of the drug is required, but it comes back essentially to the bioavailability of the drug being very poor when taken orally, but significantly improved when it's injected. Our lead program is osteoarthritis, and it is a massive market with a massive unmet medical need. 31 million sufferers for osteoarthritis in the US alone, and I will be showing a slide about the projected growth rates of this market in the US, which is one of the key take-home points. Pentosan has already been proven to have a good safety and efficacy outcome in a phase 2b clinical trial, where we had a total of 112 subjects who completed the protocol. We met the primary and secondary endpoints as well as exploratory endpoints, which looked at disease modification. So we did reach our primary endpoint of reduction in pain from baseline, improvement in joint function. We also saw a significant reduction in the grade of bone marrow lesions as measured by MRI, so an objective measurement, and also serum biomarkers. So these are biomarkers of the progression of the disease. We do have a strong IP portfolio, which includes patents on the use of xylitol for indications such as osteoarthritis, but our indications go well beyond osteoarthritis, and we will be talking about those in the years to come as we conclude our phase 3 program on the use of pentosan for osteoarthritis. Manufacturing is well and truly established. We have an agreement with this today, as we sit here, the only FDA-approved manufacturer of pentosan polysulphate worldwide, which is Bene Pharmachem, and we recently updated our agreement with Bene Pharmachem to obtain an additional term on top of our already 20-year term, which is 25 years from the date of marketing approval in a jurisdiction such as the US or Europe. So once we get marketing approval in the US, the term of our contract then continues for 25 years, meaning Paradigm has exclusive access to the only FDA-approved version of the drug. And I also must hasten to add that there are no generic versions of pentosan polysulphate on the market. Now, I know some people might go off and do an internet search and see that you can buy what we call pentosan polysulphate from India or China, but it's well established, well known to the regulatory authorities that these products are not pentosan polysulphate. They are called that, but they do have a different molecular structure to the Bene material. So they will not be approved as generic versions of pentosan polysulphate as long as they have a different chemical footprint compared to the Bene product. We are funded through our phase 3 program. We have $98.8 million of cash on the balance sheet as of our last quarterly report, and we believe that will be sufficient to get us through our phase 3 programs. However, if we have to do additional work required by the agency, then we will obviously have to look at that situation as we go. The IND submission in the US for a phase 3 trial occurred in February this year, and we did have a very good meeting with the agency where a number of key aspects of our clinical trial design were discussed, and the agency gave us very valuable feedback for the future. They also identified that there would be some issues that we needed to address prior to registration. I'll touch on one of those, and one of those is the agency said that our pharmacokinetic study, which we have on our file, is a Japanese pharmacokinetic study. In other words, all of the subjects in that study are Japanese subjects. The agency said that they do have a requirement for a pharmacokinetic study to also be completed on Western subjects. So taking that feedback on board and the fact that that could delay our registration, Paradigm decided to do or undertake the pharmacokinetic study in Australia, which is now complete, and we will be writing that up and using that as part of our submission to the US FDA to say that we do have a Western pharmacokinetic study completed, which shows very similar results to the Japanese study as we expected. However, we didn't want to run the risk of getting through phase 3 and then not having sufficient information to satisfy the regulatory agency since they identified that particular point. We had very good news recently from Europe, where we submitted our briefing pack to the EMA, and basically we asked the EMA to confirm on the various aspects of our briefing pack, which includes information for the entire development program, which includes all of our preclinical toxicology, our phase 2 study, our phase 3 clinical trial design, the manufacturing of the product, etc. So we were able to submit all of that information in a briefing pack and ask the agency, do we have sufficient evidence and is there sufficient detail and there are no gaps in the data that we have to prevent us from seeking registration, except for, of course, a successful phase 3 trial. Once that's completed, would we have sufficient evidence to warrant registration? And the response back from Europe was yes. So we believe we have all of the information necessary to commence a program in Europe, which is fantastic news for us. But most importantly, it is fantastic news that we don't have any gaps in our data set as determined by Europe, and we are asking the same questions from the FDA as part of the Type C meeting. That briefing book has gone to the FDA. I can confirm it's gone, and we will be receiving written feedback from the US FDA later this year, where again we're asking the same questions about the manufacturing of our product, our preclinical study design, our phase 2 results, our phase, our phase 3 protocol design, statistical analysis, etc., etc. And we hope that if the agency agrees that we have sufficient detail on file, we will then proceed on and file the IND and commence our phase 3 programs in North America. Now, one of the take-home messages that I want to really reinforce, so current investors or potentially new investors to look at, is the size of this market. It is phenomenal. It is a massive market, and most importantly, with a massive unmet medical need. We know from a survey that was done around 2005, where people with osteoarthritis were asked questions around their satisfaction with their current medication. And on the right-hand side of this particular chart, I draw your attention to the right-hand side. 81% of OA patients are dissatisfied with their current treatments. And we also know from the same survey, 91% of people with osteoarthritis consider themselves not ready for total joint replacement, and roughly 60% would try almost anything to avoid joint surgery. So we know that there's a very significant market there that is willing and receptive to medications that could help their condition. And we know that the market is growing and it is compounding growth. So you can see by the year 2030 that the prevalence of OA will balloon out to 67 million people. And that's estimated because of the increase in the percentage of aging in the aging population and also the obesity epidemic in the United States. So this slide is very important, I think, to say that the market that is there is real. It is a massive market. By 2030, we're looking at nearly 70 million people just in the United States, most of whom will be completely dissatisfied with their current therapies. So there is a market and it is looking for a significant solution. Now on the next slide, this slide here, I want to make my second take-home message. So the first one being that OA is a very significant market, and also that there are effectively no effective treatments for the moderate to severe class of osteoarthritis. So here we're looking at a chart which shows that analgesics and NSAIDs can be quite effective in the stage 1, the minor osteoarthritis, but as you get to stage 2, the efficacy of this class of compounds, analgesics, NSAIDs and corticosteroids, starts to become questionable, but certainly by the time you get into the moderate to severe category, these therapies are largely ineffective, as are opioids in terms of the treating of the pain. Only about a 30% reduction in their baseline pain with opioids, compared to a very consistent 50 to 60% reduction in pain that Paradigm's been seeing in our EAP programs and in our TGA special access programs. So options for patients in the moderate to severe category are limited, and Paradigm in our phase 2 study showed that in the moderate to severe range of osteoarthritis, we had very good outcomes in terms of pain reduction, improvement in joint function. We also had improvement in the patient global impression of change. We also had improvements in the what we call the disease modifying components of the study, which is the MRIs of the joint showing reduction in the grade of the bone marrow lesions, and the serum that was taken from the patients in the trial to show that they had significantly improved their biomarker profile once they were on the drug compared to placebo. So the second point here is that there is a very large unmet medical need for people in moderate to severe osteoarthritis. But I think probably most importantly, which leads into the third key point, is that a lot of fund managers in the US say, well, that's very interesting, but what is coming down the pipeline? Given the earlier slide, surely there must be many different compounds that are being developed to treat this massive unmet medical need. And I'm able to say that what we've seen this year, 2020, is that there continues to be a very high attrition rate of compounds that are being developed and in the phase 2, in the phase 3 studies showing little or no efficacy in the treatment of moderate to severe osteoarthritis. Probably the most recent case was Roche's anti-IL-6, which was shown to have no significant difference over placebo in the treatment of pain and joint function. Another disappointing outcome for the sector was the Galapagos-Gilead program, which was an Adams TS5 inhibitor. Galapagos was to stand to receive around about a $250 million US milestone payment for completing a successful phase 2. So that trial was considered to be a failure, a significant failure, because it didn't show any disease modification, and at the same time it didn't have any improvements in the symptoms of people with moderate to severe osteoarthritis. So there was no difference between placebo and the active in that case in relation to pain and function. So it was a failure, and it's being considered now probably a program that will not get any further development. So we continue to see attrition in compounds that are treating this disease. Now, this next slide is very important, I think, because what it shows is that pentosan polysulphate is a first-in-class mechanism of action, never been seen before, where a compound like pentosan polysulphate has multiple pharmaceutical actions. So all of the compounds that we know that are failing at phase 2 and phase 3 have one very consistent factor. One is that all of those compounds, Adams TS5 inhibitors, anti-IL-6, TNF, anti-TNF antibodies, these all have a single target for disease. In the case of pentosan polysulphate, what we know is that it is a number of molecules within the one molecule of pentosan polysulphate sodium. So we have a compound that has multiple different molecular entities within that one molecule, and as the FDA call them, different moieties or molecules within the molecule. And those moieties we know have different effects on the disease. We know that some of those moieties are responsible for interacting with the cells in the bone and in the cartilage to reduce the expression of nerve growth factor, which is a very powerful neurotransmitter. But at the same time, it doesn't completely block all of the NGF, because we found with anti-NGF antibodies, such as Pfizer's product, which has also failed, that it has significant side effects. such as rapidly progressing osteoarthritis. So pentosan is not blocking it completely, it down-regulates the expression of the neurotransmitter, resulting in pain reduction. Now, the most important thing that we know with the agency is that when we say those things in our briefing book, the agency will always ask, where's your supporting data for that claim? So we point to the paper that was written by Catherine Stapleton and Ravi Krishnan and others at the University of Adelaide, which looked at a study showing how PPS blocks the NGF expression at the osteocytes, the subchondral osteocytes. These are the bones under the cartilage. So we have a peer-reviewed publication to support that hypothesis. Secondly, we know that other moieties within that mix of compounds, PPS reduces joint inflammation. That work was done by Tsunaga et al. From Japan, showing very, very nicely that PPS stops the translocation of a transcription factor from entering into the nucleus and upregulating many of the pro-inflammatory cytokines such as TNF and IL-1, IL-6, etc. So that work has been done and also peer-reviewed and published. We also know that other molecules within the compound of PPS, that PPS reduces and binds the damaging enzymes that break down cartilage, such as Adams TS5. So while we know Adams TS5 is upregulated in osteoarthritis, one single target against Adams TS5 does nothing for joint inflammation and does nothing for nerve growth pain. So what we find is that you need multiple mechanisms at play in the one disease because it is a multifactorial disease. And we also know that PPS reduces bone marrow lesions. So the PPS reducing the cartilage damage is work that has been done by people like Troberg et al. From the UK and supported by biomarker studies by Stephen Budsberg in an animal model in the United States, demonstrating very clearly that PPS changes the biomarker profile of cartilage breakdown products. Also, we saw with Professor Kumagai from Japan, from Nagasaki University, also that PPS reduced C2C, which is a type 2 collagen cartilage breakdown product, and how patients on PPS had less C2C in their serum. And we also know from work by Ghosh and Cherez that PPS has a ability to reduce the bone marrow lesions by improving the vascular flow in the subchondral bone. So I think that's the three key takeaways. Osteoarthritis is a major, absolutely blockbuster indication. From our own research by my colleague Beverly, who comes from CSL, who's worked on a number of different models in terms of valuing assets. She has been able to determine that the PPS treatment of osteoarthritis, if successful in phase 3 trial, will be a multi-billion-dollar net present value. So the value of the asset is in the billions of dollars, assuming we get through a phase 3 clinical trial. Now, we do know that there is a major market waiting there in terms of the moderate to severe osteoarthritis. And we also know that a number of companies who have just a single focus on one compound or one particular area of the disease, such as a cartilage breakdown or nerve growth factor or an inflammatory factor, just a single one target approach does not work. It does not slow the disease. It does not improve the clinical symptoms. So we know that it's going to be what will win the day, we believe, will be a drug with multi-pharmaceutical actions. And we know that PPS is a compound which has subcompounds, and those subcompounds all act at different areas of the disease process. And we're very fortunate that we have an exclusive agreement with Bene, because they are the company that can produce the compound and all of the separate moieties on a consistent basis to the satisfaction and requirement of the FDA to get the product approved should we pass our phase 3 clinical trial. To highlight the fact that there are many companies working in this area, many have done major multi-million-dollar, $100 million transactions to participate in this particular field. Many of these compounds have had a number of clinical holds due to safety effects, such as all of the nerve growth factor compounds here have been on clinical hold at least 3 times. They do have a unknown long-term safety effect, but the proponents of these compounds will say the big advantage of them is that they are non-opioid based. So there is a big trade-off between these compounds and their side effects and being a non-opioid based product. Here is Galapagos and Servier. This was a European deal over this, the rights for this ADAMTS-TS5 inhibitor. So ADAMTS-TS5 is one of the enzymes that breaks down the proteoglycans that support cartilage. And if you block that compound, you may be able to preserve the proteoglycans. And if you can preserve the proteoglycans, you preserve the water content of cartilage and help cartilage stop degenerating. We know that in our phase 2 study, ADAMTS-TS5 in levels in serum in patients with PPS, the PPS group, had a significantly reduced ADAMTS-TS5 profile compared to placebo. But what we also know from the work of Galapagos is that in their phase 2 study, by blocking ADAMTS-TS5, it had no effect on the clinical symptoms of reducing pain and reducing the symptoms of joint stiffness. So it is a big, highly sought after area. And I think as we go into the US over the next few months with presentation with the Evercore group in December and JP Morgan in January, we will start to see our message continue to develop throughout North America and start to explain to fund managers why this compound has already proven to be safe and effective in a phase 2 study, but is likely to continue on down that path because of its unique and first-in-class mechanism of action, having multiple pharmaceutical activities going on at the one time. This just reinforces the huge potential that is part of the market for osteoarthritis. You can see that a 20% penetration on a indicative pricing, we could see sales of $9.3 billion at these different price points. Obviously, this is the price point that we are testing, $2.5 thousand US. And as I mentioned, we've been doing a lot of work, or Beverly's been doing a lot of work on our commercial models to value up the asset. I would also like to say that while we are a late stage pharmaceutical development company, we are also starting to now pivot and make sure that we have sufficient commercial experience on board so that we can transact should that need arise in the coming years, because Paradigm is not in a position to take this product to market itself. We will be partnering at some stage over the distribution and marketing of the product. And so what we are aiming to do is to have a global team who can have the experience to be able to help us find the appropriate distribution partners throughout the globe. In terms of how we've been proceeding, we have been gathering and consolidating our feedback from the regulators in the US, EU, and Australia. The aim is to have one pivotal protocol, which will be acceptable to all the jurisdictions, and therefore we'll do phase 3 studies in Europe and the US at the same time, combining the data and then giving us a situation of being able to get approval in these large jurisdictions almost simultaneously. So we have assembled a high caliber and experienced global team to deliver on the pivotal studies. And we have also started to develop up our commercial lead and develop our programs for the pricing and reimbursement. We are conducting patient research, looking at areas of where our drug could get greater penetration into the market. And we're also exploring the delivery of the drug to improve patient convenience, such as an auto-injector. While we continue on with our discussions with the regulators, we obtain further preclinical and clinical data and publish that in terms of the mechanism of action for the treatment of arthritic diseases. We think that's important because we'll continue to develop our data profiles for submissions to the agency. So when we talk about mechanism of action, we have all of the necessary data on board. And of course, we will be preparing a package for attracting a potential partner for the distribution and marketing of the program once we're into phase 3 clinical trials. As I mentioned, we have been working very hard on assembling some of the very best people globally to help us with our studies. And I'll show you some of the people that we've appointed in the US. We have got many of our staff in the US who've held senior executive roles with big pharma companies. Bob Hinds, for example, has been a chief medical officer at some of the big pharma companies over a career of 30 years in the pharmaceutical industry. We've also identified key opinion leaders with clinical experience with osteoarthritis patients, and they can help us with our submissions to the USA and also Europe. For example, in the US, we've worked very closely, continue to work closely with Dr. David Felsen, and in Europe, we work with Professor Stefan Lohmander. Both of these gentlemen have been involved in preparing white papers and a number of different reports for the treatment of osteoarthritis. So these people are highly credentialed in understanding what the market is needing. And I think it's also a testament to the data that we have, in that these people, I don't think, would be wasting their time if they felt that this was a futile exercise. But they have seen many other programs that have come and gone, and I think they do like the idea that the pentosan polysulphate product is got multiple pharmaceutical actions, and we've demonstrated that in a phase 2 double-blind placebo-controlled study.
Sorry, Paul, I might just rudely jump in there. We're actually just sort of going over time. Probably best just to try and wrap up in the next minute, and we'll get to a number of the questions separately after the presentation.
No problem. So thanks, Matt. I might just finish off with this slide, just showing the organisational structure in the United States. Our Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Donna Skerritt, works very closely with the key opinion leader, David Felsen, in the US for advice into clinical trial design. Robert Hinds, who's our clinical head, has worked as Chief Medical Officer for 2 or 3 of the biggest pharma companies in the US. Clinical pharmacology, Mike Eldon, worked many years with Park Davis and Pfizer as a pharmacology expert. He's been overviewing our PK study. Statistician, Dr. Jim Bolognese, who has worked with Merck for over 25 years on the statistical design of clinical trials. And Dr. Michael Imperial, who's our clinical head for MPS. Michael worked as a senior executive at BioMarin, one of the enzyme replacement companies, so he knows that space particularly well. So Matt, if I could just finish off by saying to current and future investors, what Paradigm is about is, first of all, we have a massive market with a huge unmet medical need. So osteoarthritis, we know, is not well served by current therapies, particularly in the moderate to severe category. We know that also there's many compounds that have fallen by the wayside. These are monospecific targeted pharmaceutical products. This monospecific nature of these targets does set them up to fail, because the disease is a broad-based disease involving many aspects of the joint, the bone, the cartilage, the soft tissue, the synovial fluid. There's a whole host of different biological disease processes underway, and a monospecific targeted therapy is unlikely to succeed given the magnitude of the disease, and only a multi-acting pharmaceutical product is likely to be successful. And we do know that PPS is the first in class for a multi-acting pharmaceutical product, which I think will give Paradigm a significant amount of interest, particularly in the US, where they have seen many different compounds like the Galapagos compound and many others that we could talk about, all failing at phase 2 and phase 3, failing to meet the category of disease modification or symptomatic relief in osteoarthritis. So again, I'd like to thank NWR for the opportunity to present, and also thank everyone who's participated on the call, and be happy to take any questions.
Thanks very much, Paul. To those that have submitted questions, we'll get to them separately. Unfortunately, we've just gone a bit over time. It's very hard to fit in a detailed presentation, that sort of space of time. So you've done really well there, Paul. Thanks very much. Up next, we have a number of other medtech, healthcare and biotech companies. To see those presentations, just head to nwrcommunications.com and follow the schedule there. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining, and we'll get back to the questions separately. Thanks again, Paul.
Thanks, Matt. Thank you.